Chapter 10. Doctor, are you sick? September 9th through 26th, 1900. In September, an epidemic of yellow fever broke out in Havana. The hospitals admitted 269 cases, and 1 out of every 5 patients died. It was more important than ever to find a solution to the yellow fever problem, but manpower was in short supply. Carroll was still so weak from his attack that he couldn't stand or change position without help. Agramonte was getting ready to return to the United States for a brief vacation. Reed was still in Washington putting the finishing touches on his report. In Cuba, however, Jesse Lazier was working hard. Day after day he tended the insects, carried out experiments, and jotted down his records in a big lab notebook and another smaller book he carried in the pocket of his shirt. At last the work seemed to be paying off. The results looked promising. Both Carroll and Dean had developed yellow fever after mosquito bites. The trouble was, Lazier couldn't be absolutely certain that Carroll's case hadn't been an accident. He couldn't be 100% sure that Carroll hadn't gotten yellow fever from another source. And there were other questions, too. Why, for instance, had Carroll and Dean become sick when other people bitten by infected mosquitoes had managed to stay healthy? Was there something different or special about the insects that had bitten those two men? To make a breakthrough, Lazier would have to be able to answer all those questions. He'd need to know exactly how and when a mosquito could transmit the yellow fever germ, and he'd need to prove it beyond the slightest doubt. There were lots of experiments he had to do, and Jesse Lazier was doing them when, on September 13th, he was bitten by a mosquito. No one ever knew exactly how it happened. Later, Lazier said that the incident had taken place at Las Animas Hospital in Havana. He was holding a test tube containing a mosquito against a patient's belly when a wild mosquito flew down and landed on his hand. The whole thing was an accident, he said. And maybe that was true. But if that was how it happened, then why did Jesse Lazier write a mysterious note in the team's lab notebook on September 13th, 1900? Why did he write the following? Guinea pig number 1. Red. September 13th. This guinea pig bitten today by a mosquito which developed from egg laid by a mosquito which bit Tanner, August 6th. This mosquito bit Suarez, August 30th. Hernandez, September 2nd. DeLong, September 7th. Fernandez, September 10th. And who, or what, was guinea pig number 1? It wasn't a 4-footed animal, that much was plain. Lazier didn't use guinea pigs in his experiments because they were immune from yellow fever. No healthy human volunteer ever claimed to have been bitten in a mosquito experiment that day. In fact, the only healthy person who seemed to have been bitten on September 13th was Dr. J. Lazier himself. So was guinea pig number 1 actually Lazier? Did Dr. Lazier deliberately let an infected mosquito bite him? And, if his bite was really part of an experiment, why did he tell a tale about a wild mosquito? Why didn't he identify himself as guinea pig number 1? Did he lie because his family might disapprove of such a dangerous experiment? Did he think his life insurance company would cancel out his policy if he admitted that he dared to take a deadly risk? Nobody will probably ever know the answers. But the results of that mosquito accident were immediate and clear. 5 days later, on the morning of September 18th, Jesse Lazier just didn't feel well. At 6 p.m., the doctor had a chill. Later that same evening, Private John Kissinger found the scientist sitting at his desk and busily writing up his research notes. To Kissinger, Lazier seemed nervous. The doctor's face looked flushed, and his eyes were red. "Doctor, are you sick?" the soldier asked. "Yes, Kissinger, I do feel sick." Have you reported to Dr. Ames? No, Kissinger, Lazier replied, and kept on working. By midnight, Lazier must have wanted to lie down, but it was morning before he had all the facts on paper. By then, he was much too sick to struggle. At 11 a.m., Dr. Jesse Lazier was carried to the hospital on a stretcher. His temperature was high, and he told the attending nurse that he had yellow fever. 2 days later, his temperature had risen to 104. His attack was clearly worse than Carol's, but Lazier was young. He was strong. There was still a good chance that he might recover. Reed, far away in Washington, tried to be optimistic. I can but believe Lazier will pull through, he wrote to Carol. I hope and pray that he does. But Carol, who stopped by to visit, was alarmed. As he sat beside the hospital bed, the older scientist saw a flash of panic in Lazier's eyes. Then, suddenly the sick man's belly heaved and a stream of thick black vomit shot out of his mouth. It was the worst possible sign, and both Carol and Lazier knew that patients who vomited black, partially digested blood usually died of yellow fever. For the next day or so, Lazier's temperature stayed high. Frantic with delirium, he leaped out of bed and raced around his hospital room until 2 female nurses and a hospital corpsman forced him back onto his cot. On September 24th, a nurse noted that Dr. Lazier's temperature was getting lower. By morning, on September 25th, it hovered just below 100. Then late that afternoon, the doctor's pulse began to quicken. His breath began to come in desperate pants. By 8:45 that evening, it was over. At age 34, the scientist had died of yellow fever. On the following day, friends, officers from headquarters, and all the members of Camp Columbia medical staff turned out to watch as Dr. Lazier was buried in a flag-draped coffin with full military honors. On that same day, far away in Massachusetts, Mabel Lazier, the doctor's wife and the mother of their 2 small children, opened a telegram and stared at 7 terrible words scrawled on the printed form. Dr. Lazier died at 8 this evening. The news was cruel. It was also particularly shocking because no one had ever told Mrs. Lazier that her husband had been taken sick.